Okay, thank you very much. Okay. I just want to say specifically Farbrengen should be for Refuah Shlema for Chayesara Bas Henna Reza. To have a complete, miraculous Refuah Shlema, take him Yad Mamish. The Farbrengen today is in honor of Chavdala Teives, which is the Alter Rebbe's yard site, and in the Hasidic world we refer to it as Yom Hilula. This term is found in the Zohar, Yom Hilula, which actually means something positive. It's like a day of celebration. And the reason for that is because even though down here, an event of this nature is sad, someone passed away, but up there, it's a Yom Elul, it's a time of celebrating. The Neshama reach very high heights. And it actually says that on the day of the passing, especially of a tzaddik, and especially of a tzaddik who was the leader of the generation, on that day, all the souls of other tzaddikim and anybody who had a connection to that soul throughout their lifetime, they all come to the sort of chamber where he's found, and he teaches Torah, and they're all listening, and it's a very, very opportune time. And that's why the day down here is a very special time. It's a time for bracha, and a time to ask Hashem for the things that we need by connecting to the tzaddik. And how do we connect? It's either giving tzedakah for that tzaddik, or it's by learning his teachings, or what we're doing now, having a Farbrengen, learning about his life and the things that we can learn from his life and so on. So the Alter Rebbe's passing was in the year Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel. The Alter Rebbe was 68 years old at the time, and Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel was a little bit over 200 years ago. It was 1812. What I want to go into is the circumstances that led to the Alter Rebbe's passing. I know in class it was mentioned a little bit here and there, but I think now is the time that we can elaborate on it in a full way. Now, there was very unusual circumstance that led to the Alter Rebbe's passing. The Alter Rebbe was perfectly healthy. He was 68 years old.
It's very young.
What?
It's very young.
It is a young age. In fact, the number 68 is B'gematria Chaim, which means life. And the Alter Rebbe passed away because of these circumstances, which I'm going to go into now. And that is that at the time, a war broke out. That was not a war, famous war, a war that had effect on the world in general. It was a war, it was at the time that Napoleon was running loose, and Napoleon went to conquer Russia. So there was a war between Russia and France, the Tsar and Napoleon. At that time, the Alter Rebbe was invested that Napoleon should be defeated and that the Tsar should win the war. At the same time, there was another tzaddik, and there are different opinions who the other tzaddik was. It's always mentioned as another tzaddik. In some places, it says it was someone who was called the Shloim of Karlin. And then there are those that bring proof that it couldn't be him. He passed away long before. And they say it was a different tzaddik, also one of the great Hasidic masters. And his name was Rabbi Yisrael of Koznitz. The other tzaddik was invested in the opposite, that the Tsar should lose and Napoleon should win. And the Alter Rebbe prayed and did everything he can that Napoleon should be defeated. And not only he prayed, but we can say that the last few months of the Alter Rebbe's life he was occupied almost completely with this. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. So first of all, why did the Alter Rebbe want the Tsar to win? Why is it our business who's going to win? And the way it was explained by the Alter Rebbe, there's a letter from the Mittel Rebbe explaining this. The Rebbe spoke about this numerous times, is that the Tsar wasn't such a nice person either. And if the Tsar would continue to be the king, then things wouldn't be easy for Jews. They would be living in poverty. The Jews had a lot of restrictions, what they could do, what they can't do. So they weren't really like free citizens like everybody else. But the Tsar was a non-Jew who believed in God, and it wouldn't have affected the Jewish people in a spiritual sense. Napoleon, on the other hand, everyone knows Napoleon was the result of the French Revolution. And the French Revolution wasn't just a revolution, the Gashmias, revolting against the king. It was an ideological revolution. It was a revolution introducing liberal principles, liberal ideas, that we should be free, not be under the rule of a king and a queen. But Napoleon took it even further, not under the rule of a king, of a queen, but not under the rule of anything, no religion, no faith. He made fun of people that believed. And in fact, the Rebbe writes in the Sikha that a lot of the ideas in the modern liberal world today, the foundation for that was laid by Napoleon then with France. And if he would have won the war, this would have had an impact on Jews in Russia, which eventually would have impacted the rest of the world, is that Chas v'Shalom, first of all, things would have been better physically. He would give Jews more rights, they'd be more free, and their status would be upgraded. But spiritually, this would cause Jews to abandon their faith, and Chas v'Shalom, they would be leaving Yiddishkeit. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe was very much against him. And so much was he against him that when he heard that he was coming into Russia and he might come to the Alter Rebbe's city, the Alter Rebbe said that he is such a big, powerful klipa, he was a force of evil in this world, that because we see the influence that he could have on the whole world, the Alter Rebbe said he doesn't want to be under his jurisdiction even for one moment. And the Alter Rebbe picked himself up with all his family and a lot of people that lived in the town. He lived in a town called Ladi, and they left. They shouldn't be there when Napoleon comes in. Now, the Alter Rebbe, when he left, had the escort of the Russian army. He had actually soldiers who were escorting these a few hundred families that were traveling with the Alter Rebbe. I think they say there was 60 wagons traveling. Why did he merit to have the escort from the Russian military? So the answer is that when the Alter Rebbe said that he's praying for Napoleon to lose and the Tsar to win, he wasn't only praying, he also did things begashmius, in the physical sense, helping the Russian army. And what did he do? He appointed one of his chassidim, whose name was Moshe Meislish, that he should act as a spy for the Russian army. And how was he able to do that? Because when the French were looking for people that know both languages, French and Russian, so they can translate documents, communicate with people they need to communicate with, they were looking for people, and he offered his services. And he got very close with the people on top, generals, and eventually he got to pay attention and to listen to their plans. And then he found a way, in a very secret way, to get these plans given over to the Russian army. One of the things which we know about, apparently he wrote about this himself in a letter, but one of the things we know about was that one of the things that happened was the Russian army had a huge storage place where they kept their weapons in a city called Shvinsyon. And there was an incident that the whole place blew up and all the weapons and all the arsenal they had was destroyed. And they were beside themselves because there was no way they can figure out how in the world did they do it. There are guards there are people watching, nobody came there, nobody did anything. So they had another place which also had a huge amount of weapons in a different city called Vilna. And they were very concerned that whatever they did here, obviously it was the French, but whatever they did in some brilliant way, they're going to do it in Vilna. And if they lose all those weapons, they're really going to be in a very vulnerable place. And the one who saved them was this Chasr, Moshe Meislish. He was getting close to them, and he found out how they managed to blow up all this arsenal. What they did was actually brilliant. They had two people not far from the place where it was that stayed as if they're both drunk. And they got into a fight. I guess in Russia, it's not so uncommon to find two people on the street drunk. And they got into a fight. And then one of them picked up a rock and threw it at the other one. And he missed. All this was planned. And the rock broke a window in that storage place. Immediately, a guard ran over and wanted to arrest him. And he began to plead with him. Please, I'm sorry. And he was crying. And I drank a little bit too much. They made it into nothing. And he said, I'm going to bring someone right now. I'll pay for it to fix the glass. And please let me live. And I'll give you a few bottles of vodka and everything will be fine. And the guy said, okay. So a guy came to put in the glass. But the guy that came to put in the glass was one of the French spies. And he didn't put in ordinary glass, he put in magnifying glass. What happens when the sun shines on a magnifying glass? It makes a fire. So they put in the glass, nobody was there, and all of a sudden the place blew up because it was going through this magnifying glass, which heated up the weapons, and then it blew up. And of course, one blows up the other, and the whole place was destroyed. Now that he found out, he gave over to them what the plan is. And sure enough, a little while later, the guards are on the alert in Vilna, and two people come and they're having a fight, two drunk people. They're having a fight, and immediately they arrested them, and they found out that these were actually spies, and they were planning to do the same thing in this place. So because of this and many other things, the Russian army was very grateful to the Alter Rebbe because they knew that he orchestrated this, that he should have a spy, and he was actually helping them all along, giving information. And this is the famous story that I'm sure I told it in both levels, but I'll repeat it again because today is the day. That Rabbi Majeski said that the Aleph of Chassidus saved his life. What does it mean, the Aleph? It's like saying the ABC. The Alter Rebbe taught them that they should take advantage of all the natural traits and properties that we have to serve Hashem. And one of them is that the mind controls the heart. And he said that one of the times that he was doing his work of translating, and this was in a room where all the other generals were there, and they didn't care about him because they actually trusted him, they were close with him, and he was translating but listening in to their plans. And all of a sudden the door flew open, and at first they were ready to shoot because who's coming into this room uncalled for? They figured maybe it's from the French army. Turns out it was Napoleon himself. And he goes in, storms the room, looks at this chassid, and said to him, what are you doing here? You must be the spy. They knew there's a spy somewhere in the upper places of the army. They had no idea who it is. When he saw this chassid who doesn't really fit into the picture, he said, you're the spy. And he put his hand on his heart to see if his heart will be racing. And the chassid said, because I was trained by the Alter Rebbe, that the mind controls the heart, I controlled my heart to be, the heartbeat should be as normal as it always is. And when that happened, he put his hand down, like, forget it. This guy has no clue. Because, like I said many times, even if the guy was totally innocent and Napoleon accuses you of being a spy and puts his hand on your heart, in a second you could be gone, so your heart would be racing.
What I wanted to say, like, if Napoleon walks in and tells him you're a spy, anyway, if you're not. Like,
even if you're not a spy,
yeah,
how much more so when you know that you are a spy? So his heart should be racing at 120 miles an hour. And the fact that it wasn't proved to him not only he's not a spy, he's probably an idiot and clueless. He doesn't understand anything. But the chassid really was able to do it because the mind was able to control the heart. So therefore, they knew this. And as a result of this, by the way, the Alter Rebbe's son, and the Alter Rebbe's grandson, all the Rebbes of Chabad were given a special sort of privilege and honor from the Tsar because of what they did to help them in this war. And they used it in later generations as giving them special privileges and protecting them from certain threats that came. But I just want to say that that this is the reason why the Alter Rebbe was getting the protection from the Russian army. Now, because these two tzaddikim were having, each one naturally had their spiritual reason why they thought their side should win. The Alter Rebbe said that it was decided in the heavenly court that whichever one of the two will blow shofar first, they'll have it their way. So it's Rosh Hashanah, and the Alter Rebbe is rushing to blow shofar first, and the other tzaddik is also rushing to blow shofar first. So they describe how the other tzaddik got up early in the morning, started davening as early as you can. You can't start too early. There's a certain time that you can start. He started the first moment you can. He raced through the davening like he never did before. He took the shofar to blow it. And before he took the shofar, he said, forget it. The Alter Rebbe got me. He's ahead of me. No purpose in me blowing the shofar now. How did the Alter Rebbe manage to outrace him? Because what he did was he davened very fast, so he should get to the shofar blowing very fast. What the Alter Rebbe did was he did something different. He blew shofar before davening. So he never davened, he just blew shofar right away. Normally, that's not the way you do it. But halachically, as you know, a lot of people, they blow shofar for their wives before they go to shul. People who can't fast so long, they blow shofar. So you're allowed to. And the Alter Rebbe said, under these circumstances, that's a better thing to do. And he blew shofar first. So the Alter Rebbe said that Napoleon wasn't just a warrior and an aggressive person. He was actually a klipper, and he had the power of sorcery. And that's how he was able to accomplish the thing that he accomplished. So after the Alter Rebbe left, after they traveled for a few hours, the Alter Rebbe suddenly told one of the generals, I must go back. Give me one wagon that can travel fast, and I'm going to go back to our town, to Ladi. He went back, and he wanted someone to go in there, search the house, and make sure that there's nothing left there. The person searched the house, the place was empty, but they found, in the attic, he found an old pair of slippers. Then the Alter Rebbe requested that they take a match and put the house on fire, burn the house down. No one understood why. But it says that when Napoleon came into the town, the first thing he asked for was, where does Rabbi Baruchovich live? The Alter Rebbe's last name was Baruchovich, not Schneerson, because in those days, the names were by the father. The Alter Rebbe's father was Reb Baruch, so his name was Baruchovich. The Mitzvah Rebbe's father was Reb Shneir Zalman, so his name became Shneir, Shnei Uri. And the Tzemach Tzedek, he's the one who gave the name Shneir's son, and then all the Rebbes of Chabad and all the other descendants are called Shneir's son. So he asked find his house. He came to the house, the place was on fire. So he demanded that they put the fire out, but the fire was raging and they couldn't put it out. And then he took out a gold coin and said, whoever brings me any article that belonged to the Alter Rebbe, I will give him this gold coin. But nobody in town brought him anything. The reason why he did that was because he was a sorcerer. And he apparently knew that if he had an article in his hand that belonged to the Alter Rebbe, he could use that and make an attempt to do damage, chas v'shalom, to the Alter Rebbe with his power of sorcery. And that's why the Alter Rebbe went back and asked to burn the whole place down. In fact, he had his soldiers searching for the Alter Rebbe. There are stories of Alter Rebbe was hiding in different places because they were searching for him, because he knew that spiritually, the Alter Rebbe is the force that's fighting him. And of course, Baruch Hashem, that never happened. It's interesting, there's another thing which is based on this, is we have a song that we sing, it's called Napoleon's March. Right? And we sing that in the holiest day of the year. I know when people hear about it the first time, they're like in shock. Yom Kippur, at Ne'ilah, before the shofar blowing, you sing Napoleon's March. What's Napoleon doing in the shul altogether, and especially on Yom Kippur? So the reason for this is because during this war, there was a point when Napoleon did go into Russia. He penetrated Russia. Then later he was defeated and they had to retreat. But when he went into Russia, they came running to the Alter Rebbe and said, you promised us that he's going to be defeated, and now he's in Russia. And the Alter Rebbe was actually wearing tefillin at the time. The Alter Rebbe wore tefillin all day, by the way. In the times of Gemara, people wore tefillin all day. Then it stopped. After the Gemara, there were certain people, selected people that wore tefillin all day. The Alter Rebbe wore tefillin all day. And he said, look, I'm wearing tefillin, which has Hashem's name in it. And he said, I swear to you that he will be defeated. He was going to lose the war. Right now he's in Russia, but he'll have to retreat. And that's what happened, because I think they say his soldiers couldn't handle the freezing cold weather, and they were dying out, and they lost. He wasn't ready for that. So the Alter Rebbe asked, could someone sing to me the March of Victory that they sang when they went into Russia? When they went into Russia, they sang a March of Victory. So they sang this song. And the Alter Rebbe said that it's truly a song of victory. In other words, the Alter Rebbe proved that the song really expresses victory. And then Alter Rebbe leaned on his forehead and said, but ultimately, it will be Didan Natzach. Didan is an expression of Gemara. Our side will be victorious. But then the Alter Rebbe adapted this song, took it over, and made it into a Chassidish nigun. And we sing it at the end of Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur, we're on trial. There's a judgment. And we want to announce that Didan Natzach, we won. And that announcement is made by singing this song of victory, so that we are victorious over the Satan who's trying to, chas v'sholem, bring negative things into the world. So this was one thing. There's also another thing that the Alter Rebbe had a grandson. His name was Reb Nachum. He was a son of the Mittel Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad. And when he was older, he used to travel very often. The Alter Rebbe is buried in a city called Haditch. And when he was older, he used to go to the city quite often. And when he got even older, he stayed there for months. And everybody was puzzled, like, he's older, he needs his family now, he needs people to help him to take care of himself. And why is he spending so much time there? And there were all sorts of rumors, what people think. And most people thought it was connected to this story, which is that when the Alter Rebbe was traveling, and there was 60 wagons, and he was traveling with the soldiers of the Russian army. The Russian soldiers were at the front, and the Alter Rebbe's wagon was the second wagon. Whenever they came in the fork in the road, they would stop and ask the Alter Rebbe what to do. And sometimes the Alter Rebbe would just say what he's thinking. Sometimes he would walk out, look around, and then he'd tell them, we'll go this way, go that way. Now, this grandson, he was sitting in the wagon with the Alter Rebbe, and he would be the one to give the message to the Russian generals. At one point, they came to a place, they had to make a decision, and the Alter Rebbe told the grandson, we're going with this road. As they're traveling, the Alter Rebbe turns to the grandson, where is this in this village? We haven't passed this village yet. And when they heard that, the grandson said, oi, I made a mistake. I told him to go down the other road. Down the other road, we don't pass this village. The Alter Rebbe was very pained, and he said that fortunate is the grandfather that the grandson follows his path, and how unfortunate it is for a grandfather that he has to follow the grandson's path. In other words, you led me down the wrong road. And the Alter Rebbe said that he knew if we reach a certain spot before Rosh Hashanah, then obviously he would live. And if not, this is what's going to happen. And that's what happened at the end. And therefore, they thought that he spent so much time by the Alter Rebbe's gravesite, by the Ohel, because he was asking for forgiveness and he felt that it was his fault and so on. Turns out that he told them, no, that's not the reason why. It was a different reason. And he told an interesting story, and that was the main reason. And he said that when he was a chassan, the style in those days was that the chassan used to wear something on their coat, sort of a certain fur, which is very nice and elegant, and that's what people wore. And he bought that for himself, for his chuppah, for his wedding. The Alter Rebbe called him in. There's more depth to the story than on the surface, but this is the story. He called him in, and he said, what would you like me to give you that you shouldn't have this fur on your coat for the wedding? And he said, actually, nothing. I really want to have it. So the Alter Rebbe said, and what would you do if I would just tear it a little bit, like rip it? It wouldn't be perfectly nice. So I don't want to have a ripped garment. The Alter Rebbe said, you know what? If you agree to what I'm asking you and let me rip it, then I'll make a time to learn with you every week. He said, I'm not ready to have a ripped garment. The Alter Rebbe said to him, you know what? I'll promise you that if you let me do it, that in the world to come, you'll be with me together. Now, that was a little bit tough. So he said to Alter Rebbe, okay, but do I have to agree, completely, or I can do it reluctantly? The Alter Rebbe said, no, you have to agree. It has to be from the depth of your heart. So he didn't answer because he wasn't up to it. But at the chuppah, the Alter Rebbe tore that part of the garment, then gave him a bracha, and that was the reason why he's upset. He understood exactly why and how is it that he didn't agree with the Alter Rebbe. So I'm saying there's more to the story, but he understood the Alter Rebbe there was a certain klipa at the time, which was where people want to go along with the style, just to go with the flow, wear what everybody else wears. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is because when you go with the style in your clothing, then eventually you start going with the style with other things. In fact, this week's Parsha is one of the places where we're taught, do you know what I'm talking about? In the beginning of the Parsha, it says, what? Right? Their names weren't changed, their language wasn't changed, and what else? And the clothing wasn't changed. They didn't change their style. These are the way the Egyptians are dressed, so we have to dress the same way. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe wanted to sort of break that klipa, and obviously by him tearing it, that would have a spiritual effect on causing a weakness in that klipa. And he was thinking about himself personally. He didn't want to have a flaw. He looked at it, obviously it would be a reflection of something spiritual. He'd be missing, he'd be lacking, he'd have something wrong. So because of that, he said, for the rest of his life, he regretted that he didn't agree with the Alter Rebbe, and that's why he's here. But there is this story that he led the Alter Rebbe down the wrong path. And as a result of that, this led to the passing. It was winter. It was these months. The time that the Alter Rebbe ran away from Ladi was in the month of Av, in the summer. And from Av, Elul, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teives, almost 5 months, the Alter Rebbe was out there on the run, going from one place to the next, and constantly running away from the French soldiers. And as a result of that, he got sick. And then I don't know what the exact illness was, but it was caused by the cold. And then eventually, a little while later, he passed away. And where was he when he passed away? He was in an inn. There was an inn where they stayed, and they passed away. He passed away in that inn. And there's actually a very interesting story about the inn. That there's a story with two people that initially they were religious Jews, but then they went into business and they did a lot of traveling. And in those days, they couldn't deliver kosher food with a drone. So when you're traveling and you don't have any kosher food, what do? Either you have to suffer a little bit of hunger, or you start compromising on the laws of kashrus. They began compromising on the laws of kashrus and compromising on more things. And eventually, they sort of gave up their observance of Torah mitzvahs, these two people. One time they came to an inn. The innkeeper saw that he's dealing with the Jews, so he said to them, so you guys want food only that's kosher, or doesn't matter what kind of food? So they said, doesn't matter, whatever you have. That's where they were holding. It didn't really matter anymore after many years of traveling. So they're waiting for their food, and suddenly they're shocked to see that instead of food coming, this guy comes back with a few other people. They have in their hands tools. One has an axe, one has a knife, one has a chain, one has a hammer. And they said to them, you think you came to an inn? You fell into this little trap. This is our sort of hideout. Give us all the money you have, and this is the end of your life. And he began to plead with them, we'll give you everything, just let us live. He says, no, it's not going to work. I know the first thing you do is go to the police, and that's the end. So we have no choice but to end your life. And they're pleading and talking. And he says, there's only one thing that we can do is give you some more time. I'll let you be in this room. I'm going to lock up the room. Want to live for a few more hours? Fine. But at the end, this is what we need to do. Now they're in the room, they're locked up. And of course, they're hysterical, they're panicking. How can they get out of here? And then they start thinking about their lives, their wives, their children, their life. And right away they came to realize, who knows, maybe this is because of our observance. We stopped with Shabbos, we stopped with kashrus, we stopped with mitzvahs. And they were crying, I'm really doing tshuva. And then they promised Hashem that if he helps them get out of this danger, from now on, they'll go back to where they were, keep Torah, keep mitzvahs. After a few hours, they hear footsteps, they're coming. And they realize this is it, this is the end. The door opens up, and again, they're in shock. This person walks in with a tray of food, meat, and vegetables, and whatever, with a smile on his face, puts it down on the table, and they're looking like, is you for real? Is this for real? Is that for real? And he says to them, I know you don't understand what's happening. I'll soon explain. Eat something first. Calm down. We're not dangerous. We're not going to do anything to you. I'll soon tell you what this is. And he told them the following. He said, 10 years ago, there was a very righteous person that was in this inn. And in the room that you're in right now, he passed away in that room. Obviously, this person wasn't Jewish. And he said that rabbi, before he passed away, made a request. And he said, if it'll ever happen that two people will come to you, two Jews, and they're going to say, it doesn't matter whether they keep kosher or not, please do whatever you can to make them return to their roots. And he said, I forgot about it. But the Alter Rebbe told me, and that's what I heard, this version of the story, that when you're going to then go open the door is going to be squeaking. And that squeak should remind you what I told you. And that's what happened. I remembered. And therefore I did what I did. And I heard from the other side of the door that you really are doing tshuva. And therefore I want you to know that you have nothing to worry about. We're really good people. I did this because the rabbi asked me to do it. Who's the rabbi? He gave him the name. They didn't know who it was. He told them he's buried not far from here. He's buried in a place called Haditch. And he went to Haditch. They realized this was the Alter Rebbe. And I guess eventually they became Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. So that's the story of the Alter Rebbe's Histalkus. And the Rebbe explains in the Sikha, like, why is it the Alter Rebbe spent these 4 months, the last months of his life was all about defeating France. And this is a little bit more, we need the books to look inside, but the Rebbe brings the sources that, of course, the whole world has to change for Mashiach to come. But one of the countries that are singled out in the prophecies about what's going to change when Mashiach comes is France. In Hebrew, France is called Tzarfas. And if you look in the Chumash, Parshas Vayishlach, in the Haftorah, where it talks about the future redemption with Mashiach, one of the countries that are mentioned there is Tzarfas, which is France. Now the Rebbe says, from this we see that the transformation of France is basically relevant, and it's part of the process of all other countries being transformed. And now we can't even compare France the way it is today to the way it used to be in the times of Napoleon. In the times of Napoleon, it was such a klippa. The Alter Rebbe said that he didn't want to even be under the jurisdiction of this person for one moment, that he left the country. And now the Rebbe said it's a place where there's Torah, there's mitzvahs, there's shuls and yeshivas, and especially with the Alter Rebbe. So Alter Rebbe has his yeshiva there, and Chassidus is being taught there, and the opposite is happening. And in fact, the Rebbes of Chabad made a point to sort of have no influence on France. So the Alter Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the first three never stepped into France. The first one to come to France was the Rebbe Marash. And the Rebbe Marash came there a few times, of course, only a visit, and went back. One of the times is the famous story that he went to Paris. He took along with him two Chassidim, and he says he wants to stay in this hotel. It was the most expensive hotel in Paris. It was a hotel where only the nobility would stay there, like people who were noblemen, people from the royalty would stay there. Very expensive hotel. And when they went in, the Rebbe Marash said, please give me a room on the same floor where the casino is, where the people are gambling. And of course, the Chassidim were shocked. First of all, why is the Rebbe here in the first place? And why does he want the floor where there's people are playing and gambling? But later they found out that Rebbe Marash made up with them to meet at a certain time, and he went into that room. He walked in as if he knew the place and he knew what's there and he knew who's there. Walked over to a table. There was money on the table. There was wine, and people were sitting there and gambling. And the Alter Rebbe turned to one of the people sitting by the table and said to him, "Drinking treif wine is something which clogs the mind and clogs the heart of a Jew. It's time to become a Jew." Said these words and he walked away. And the person sitting there was like shocked. But a little bit later, he went looking for the Rebbe Marash. Went to the Rebbe Marash, came to his room, spent a few hours there. When he walked out, his face was red, his eyes were red from crying, and he became about tshuva. And the Rebbe Marash said that such a pure neshama hasn't been in this world for the last 300 years. But it was in the wrong place. Took the wrong turn somewhere. In his travels, the neshama. And nevertheless, Rebbe Marash brought him back. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said when he was in France, that is a family here, a very big family with a lot of children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. They're all descendants of this person that the Rebbe Marash changed the course of his life. So the Rebbe Marash was in France, the Rebbe Rashab was in France, the Frierdiker Rebbe was in France, and we know that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin also spent 8 years in France until the war broke out. And the Rebbe explains that the reason why they went to France was spiritually to be able to make changes that ultimately we can have what we have today in France, a country which is actually, if you're familiar with what's going on in France, it's one of the places in the world where the movement of tshuva took off in a way that was unparalleled to any other place. There was a rabbi called the Rabbi Azimov, and he worked with college students, and like every day, every other day, another person was getting more involved in Yiddishkeit, and it was like growing exponentially. And now in France, in every country, in every city in France, there's probably a shliach, just like in America, and people are changing the face of France. So it's all part of that process. So this is the story of Chabad Teives, what the Alter Rebbe was doing the last months of his life. And it was a Motzei Shabbos. In fact, the Alter Rebbe made Abdullah, and shortly after Abdullah, that's when the Alter Rebbe's passing took place. It was Parsha Vahira. I think this covers this part of it that I wanted to talk about, the passing. And now we'll talk a little bit about the Alter Rebbe himself. So we know the Alter Rebbe was at the forefront of spreading Chassidus. There were many Chassidic masters that were teaching Chassidus and had students, but the one who was sort of very proactive and aggressive in spreading Chassidus was the Alter Rebbe, and mainly in Lithuania. And the Alter Rebbe himself was from Lithuania, and that's where the greatest opposition was coming from. And what we know is that the opposition against Chassidus wasn't coming from just ordinary people. It was coming from the greatest Torah scholars, the greatest rabbis, people that were respected worldwide. And yes, they were against Chassidus because they misunderstood what it's all about. We spoke about this before Yitzhak Kislev. And they thought that it's a movement that goes against Yiddishkeit. But the Alter Rebbe personally was involved in bringing so many people to Chassidus. And he did it by traveling in a lot of places personally, talking to people, talking publicly. And I just want to tell you a few of the stories of how some of the sort of key figures of Chassidim became Chassidim, and how they themselves later spread Chassidus to all their places. So the city, which was the headquarters of the opposition, that city was called Vilna. And the reason is because the rabbi of that city was considered the greatest Torah authority of the Lithuanian world at that time. He was called the Vilna Gaon. Gaon in Hebrew is genius, Torah genius. He was the biggest Torah genius of that time. And he was against the Alter Rebbe. And he did everything he can to fight the Hasidic movement. Unfortunately, with all the attempts that he should change his approach, it didn't work. In fact, the Alter Rebbe And another student of the Maggid, who was called the Mendel of Hardok, traveled to Vilna and made every effort to have an appointment to meet with him and have a face-to-face discussion so to clear things up, because a lot of the things that he heard were hearsay, were not true, were rumors, and that's why he was so opposed. But unfortunately, the people around him did everything they can to prevent such a meeting, and there wasn't a meeting, it never happened. And in fact, they wanted to attack the Alter Rebbe, they had to run away from there, so that never happened. But in the Vilna, in that city itself, some of the leaders of the city actually became big Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe. So I just want to use an example of one of the people. His name was the mayor of Falls. He was actually one of the people in charge of that city. And I want to give the story of how he became a Chassid. Before I go into that, I just want to mention one other thing, and that is, of course, the greatest. Alter Rebbe performed many miracles, and I'm going to tell the story about some of these miracles. But of course, the Alter Rebbe primarily was not just a miracle worker, he was a teacher of Torah. He taught Chassidus, and Chassidus is sort of a new path. Chassidus Chabad is a new path within Chassidus itself. And even though the Alter Rebbe has, if you go to any bookcase, you'll find probably 20, 30 books of Hasidic Maimorim from the Alter Rebbe, but there are 3 books that stand out. One of them is Tanya, which you all know about. And then there are 2 other books I just want to show them to you. One of them is called Torah. This is one book. Torah is a Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, or a few Maimorim on each parsha of the Torah. But this book covers Chumash Bereishis and Chumash Shmos. Then there's a second volume, which is called Likutei Torah, and that's a continuation. It's a different name, but it's a continuation. And it's a Maimer on each parsha from Chumash Bar Yikra, Chumash Bar Midbar, Chumash Dvarim, and Shir HaShirim. And why do they have different names if it's the same thing, just 2 volumes? So the answer is because after the first one was printed, the Jews of the Enlightenment movement, who knew that the Alter Rebbe and the Hasidus that he's teaching is the biggest threat to their movement of enlightenment and modernizing Judaism. So they decided that if we can stop these Hasidic books from being published, then we'll stop the Hasidic teachings from being spread. And that's exactly what they did. They went to the government and they filed a accusation against the publishers. And they said that they're publishing books which are dangerous for the government and it's against the government. And at the end, they closed down the publishing house for 10 years. So after the first one was published, they couldn't do anything more. Only 10 years later were they able to publish a second volume. And for some reason or other, when it came to 10 years later, the Talmud Tzedek said that he's going to change the name. But these are the 3 main books of the Alter Rebbe. And in the Sichos, it says that just like in the Torah in general, we have the Chumash, and then you have Gemara. The Chumash is the written Torah, the Gemara is the oral Torah. So in Chassidus, you have a similar structure. Tanya is like the written Torah of Chassidus, and these 2 books are like the Gemara, like the oral Torah, that all the Chassidus of all the Rebbes of Chabad, following the Alter Rebbe, they all base their teachings on what's found in these 2 books. So to give you an example of the Chassid, so in some places people were attracted to Chassidus because they heard the Maimarim and they were blown away from Chassidus. Also, the Alter Rebbe was a genius in Gemara. The Alter Rebbe was a genius Bechlal and a genius in Torah. He went through, knew the whole Torah backwards and forwards, inside out, vast knowledge of everything in Torah. And he went to these places where there were Torah scholars, and he had discussions in Torah with them, and they were blown away by the Alter Rebbe's brilliance. And they realized it's inconceivable that all the stories they tell negatively about him are true. And they discovered the Alter Rebbe is really a tzaddik, and we should follow him. And sometimes the Alter Rebbe inspired people through a miracle that he performed. And sometimes it was both. But there was a story where the Alter Rebbe, a chassid once said, how did he become a chassid? The Alter Rebbe came to a certain town, which had a lot of Torah scholars there. He went up to the platform, he banged on the table, and he said just a few words, but he used to speak with a niggin, with a sing-song. He said, Tam, I'll say it how he said it, and then I'll repeat it. He said, Tamuru kitei bavaya, Versucht wird es sein, as the Rebishter is good, or the Gettelkeit is good, which means just taste it, and you'll see how good and delicious godliness is. And when he said these words, he didn't explain anything, didn't add anything, just said these words and said everybody was so inspired, they just followed the Alter Rebbe, and they later became Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. And of course, there were places where there were debates. In those days, people who have debates, public debates, where one party would say, what's wrong with Chassidus? And the Chassidim would defend Chassidus. And there were places where the Alter Rebbe himself participated in the debates. And most of the time, after these debates, dozens of people became Chassidim because they saw the greatness of the Alter Rebbe in Gemara and Halacha, and they saw that all the questions and all the attacks against Chassidim had no real basis. But this is a story with someone called Rameir Foles. And like I said, he was in the headquarters of the opposition, and yet he became a chassid. There are actually 3 stories related to him becoming a chassid. No, I should say 2 stories. One story was that there was a woman who her husband disappeared. She had no idea where he was. She didn't know if he was alive. And she was in a state which is called aguna. Aguna means a woman that has no married life, and she can't have a married life because her husband is gone, and she can't remarry because if her husband is gone for the reason that he died, then she could remarry. But we don't know. It could be he's alive somewhere. He never gave her a divorce, so it's called like it's a very difficult situation to be in. She doesn't have a life, and she can't have a life unless you find the person, and if he's alive, to force him to give a get, or you find out that he's really not alive anymore. So she came to the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe was very clear. He said, go to the city of Vilna and ask Rabbi Yisrael, the Malamed of a different city, that he should go to Vilna and he'll help you find her husband. So the woman said, that's a big trip. I don't have the money for this. The Chassidim said, listen, the Alter Rebbe gave you such clear direction where you're going to find your husband. We'll get the money together. We'll get you going. They got her the money. And one of the Chassidim or 2 of the Chassidim traveled with her to help her. They came to that city and they asked around, is there someone here, Yisrael Malamed? None of the Chassidim knew such a person. And they find out there is such a person, but he's not a chassid. He actually belongs to the other group. So they came to him and they said, I want to ask you for a favor. What's the favor? And the man, of course, was floored. We're asking you to come with us and travel to Vilna, and you'll help this woman find her husband. He was like laughing. What are you talking about? I don't know her husband. I don't know who she is. Where am I going to go in Vilna? Who am I going to speak to? And they begged him, they pleaded with him. It's from the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe wouldn't do such a thing. It must be that her husband is there. Okay, but I have a class to teach. I teach children. We'll pay for a substitute. We'll pay for the travels, everything. And he finally agreed. He just felt Rahmanas with this woman. But on the other hand, in the back of his head, he was thinking, I hope they're not just taking this woman for a ride, with their superstitious stories of miracles. They come to Vilna, and they came to this person, I came to this person, and he's the head of the community, Rabbi Meir Foles. He was not a chassid. And she comes to him, and they said, the Alter Rebbe sent me here. I'm mixing up 2 stories. I didn't have my coffee yet the second time. I'm sorry. I just mixed up 2 stories. The story is, forget about the guy who's the teacher. That's another story. I'll get there later. This is a story that happened after he became a chassid. I'm talking about something before he became a chassid. The Alter Rebbe said to the woman, go to Vilna, go to Rabbi Meir Foles, he's the head of the place, and he'll help you find your husband. And that's what happened. She went to Vilna, and she came to ask him, where, could you tell me where I can find my husband? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, describe him to me. I don't know such a person. But the Alter Rebbe told me to come to you. The Alter Rebbe told you to come to me. Listen, there's nothing I can do for you. she said, being the Alter Rebbe sent me, I know for sure you're the answer. And I want to let you know, I'm not leaving here until you find me my husband. Okay, what did he think? He thought that she's nuts. Again, he thought that these Hasidim are really taking advantage of naive people, sending her off hundreds of miles to go look for something. And she sat down on the stairs of his house. And whenever he came in or out, she was crying and begging and pleading, find my husband. And him and his wife would talk amongst themselves, like, how could they do that to this poor woman? After being there for a few days, he gets a message to come to the police station. And the police officer says, they had a deal that they made, that if Jews get arrested, he would come down to see who they are. And sometimes they would, it depends on the situation, they'd be ready to pay money or do something to get this person out of jail. So being that they have a few new people like that, they want to come down. He comes down, he sees one of the people there and he's in shock. He fits the description that this woman gave exactly. So he went back to the woman and said, you know what, come with me, tell me if you can identify this person. And sure enough, she identified him. And he admitted that he's the husband, and he just ran away to torture her. They forced him to give a get, and they gave a divorce, and she was freed. She was freed, and he started to have doubts. Maybe there is something there with this Alter Rebbe and the Chassidim. He didn't become a Chassid, but he started to have doubts. But then there was a second incident that happened, and after that, he made a move. The second incident was that there were two people in his town that were businessmen. They did big business, and apparently they did business with the government, with the Russian government. And when you're in business, you have competition, and the people they had competition with were jealous of him, that he's making all this money. And they did what unfortunately was very common in those days. They found some sort of false accusation to accuse him that he stole money from the government, which is a federal offense. In those days, it could mean jail for the rest of your life, or even, God forbid, to be executed. They went to lawyers, and no matter what, the lawyers said they don't think there's anything you can do. They tried it from every angle, and they were very broken. They were sitting by someone's table. It was on Shabbos, and they were just moaning and groaning, and you could see all over their faces that they're not in a good place. And he begged them, tell me, maybe I can help you. And they told him what's going on in their life. And he said to them, you know what? He was a chassid. He said to them, I would suggest go to the Alter Rebbe in Lozhna and ask for a bracha. He's a big tzaddik. He helped so many people. Listen, the lawyers can't help you. You have nothing to lose. So they started to think about it. Then they came to this person who was the head of the community, Rabbi Meir Foles. They said, we want to consult with you. Do you think it's worth it for us to go to the Alter Rebbe? And he said to them, I once had a story with the Alter Rebbe. And actually, I was laughing, and turned out to be that it was pretty miraculous that he sent this woman to my town. I suggest you go and see what happens. And you know what? Do me a favor, when you come back, let me know what the results were. So they came to the Alter Rebbe. They told the Alter Rebbe about their dilemma. Instead of giving them advice, the Alter Rebbe said, I see you're Torah scholars. Maybe you can give me an answer to a Torah question. They weren't really interested. That's not what they came for. They didn't come to discuss Torah. They came for advice, how to save their lives. But anyway, they're being respectful. Alter Rebbe said like this, it says in Gemara, Malchusa di Ara ke'ein Malchusa di Rakia. Kingdom in this world is similar to kingdom in that world, to Hashem's kingdom. In what way? Where's the similarity? In what way is it similar? They weren't even interested in looking for an answer. I don't know. The Alter Rebbe says, and I'll give you an answer. When we talk to Hashem in davening, first we address Hashem in a very respectful way. When we daven, we say, Hakel, HaGadol, HaGibur, HaNeira, we give all these praises of Hashem's greatness, and then we present our request. King here on earth is also the same thing. The proper protocol is when you come to the king, first you honor the king and you express your awe, respect for the king, and then you present your request. Okay, thank you. They were very disinterested, very disappointed, and out of that, very upset. They wasted time, they wasted money, They were just taken for a ride. They came back. They had not too much time to think because their trial was coming up and they had to go to Moscow for their trial, or Petersburg. When they come there, they went to the lawyers again, and the lawyers said, they just shrugged their shoulders. There's nothing we can do. This is a very difficult thing. There's nothing to do. Then the lawyer said, there's only one thing that maybe we can give you hope, and that is not through the legal system. The person in the palace who is the minister of these affairs, has to do with construction and money, finances, all you can do is maybe just fall to his feet and beg him that he should interfere and help you and tell him that you're innocent. Maybe he'll be compassionate, but the regular legal system, there's no hope. How can we get to this minister? So he says, I'll tell you, he goes for a walk every day in this royal park, this and this hour, go to the guard, give him a nice sum of money, he'll let you in, and then you'll approach the minister. So they go to the park, they approach the guard, they give him a nice sum of money, he says, okay, you can hide over here. When I see the minister coming, I'll motion to you and you'll come out of your hiding place and you can approach him. Because if anyone sees you here, you're in trouble and I'm in trouble. Okay. So he went into hiding and the minister starts walking, but it wasn't the minister that they needed of finances. It was the minister of education. So he makes a motion to them like, don't come out. They misunderstood. It meant come out. So they come out of the hiding place and they fall to his feet and they're crying, please, you have to have compassion. My wife and children were so innocent. And the guy can't even have a chance to talk to them. Finally, he said, I hear your story, but I really feel bad for you because I'm not the minister you're looking for. I'm the minister of education. When they heard that, they began to run. Like now they can get arrested for being in the park, even trying to talk to the minister. And as they're running, he says, wait a second, come back here. That's it. This is the end, before the end. So they come back and he says, you look to me like Jews, right? Yeah. You know what? The king asked me a question and I'm thinking about it for the last few days. If you can give me an answer to this question, which is from the Jewish Talmud, I'll do what I can to save you. Wow. What's the question? It says in the Talmud that royalty in this world is like royalty in that world. What's the connection between kingdom here and kingdom there? In what way is it similar? What does the Talmud mean? Of course, they were shocked, but they just heard from the Alter Rebbe an explanation. So they said to him what the Alter Rebbe said. He said, listen, I like it. I'm going to go back to the king. If this finds favor in his eyes and he's happy, I'll present your case. And that's what happened. He came back to the king. The king liked it. And he told him, I met these two people that looked to me very sincere and innocent. They're just people that are jealous of them. They intervened and they were off the hook. They came back to Mayor Falls and they told him, unbelievable. We came to him. We were so upset. He's wasting our time, giving us Torah insights when we came for advice. But that's what saved our life. Obviously, he saw ahead of time that this is what's going to happen. He didn't tell them what to do. He just told them the words of Torah. When Mayor Falls heard the story, he decided, okay, I'm going to the Alter Rebbe and let me check this out myself. Let me see what it's all about. And he became one of the biggest chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. The story that I started to tell, what I said is the wrong story, because that's a story that actually happened later, after he became a chassid already. And that was a story with something else. The people who printed these books of Chassidus, they were called the Shapiro brothers. And in order to open a printing press, a publishing house, you needed to get a special permission, a permit from the government, which number one cost a lot of money. And number two, it might be very difficult. Who says they'll give me a permit to publish Torah books? So they came to the Alter Rebbe for advice. And the Alter Rebbe said to him, go to this city, gave him the name of a city, I think Moldiv. And he said there's a teacher of Torah, his name is, he teaches children, Rabbi Yisrael, the teacher, and ask him to go to Vilna to help you. So they came to that city. Initially, they thought it must be a chassid. But amongst the chassidim, there was nobody who was a teacher of children with that name. And what happened was that they decided to ask around, and they found out that among those who are not Hasidim, there's someone with such a name. So this man said to him, I'm looking to get a permit, and I need to get a permit from one of the ministers in the government. And the Alter Rebbe told me I should go to Vilna and I'm going to get the permit, but I should bring you with me. You'll help me. Please. So, of course, the guy said, are you at it? You want me help you? First of all, I'm a teacher of children. Second of all, I don't speak any Russian. I can't speak to ministers. Third of all, what in the world do I have in Vilna? I don't know anybody. It sounds to me, the whole thing sounds absurd to think that I'm going to be the one to accomplish this. And he said to him, listen, I'm a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. I know what he says is true. And I'm begging you, I'll pay you all the money necessary for substitute. I'll pay you for your travels. I'll give you extra money. Just do me a favor and come with me. So they came to Vilna. And they came to this person, of Mayor of Foles. He was the head of the community. He was actually the person who dealt with government people, with people that are in charge of the government. And they felt that he would know what to do. And he said, I have no idea. In fact, Vilna is not the place. The place for this is Petersburg. That's where all the ministers are found, not Vilna. But you know what? As Chassidim, if the Alter Rebbe sent you to me here in Vilna, there's no question that something will come up. Let's wait around. So the two Chassidim were confident that something's going to come up. But this person was beside himself, like, what am I doing, wasting my time? They don't even know what I'm doing here. Why did I come here for? Why did I listen to them? And a few days went by, and they decided, let's go outside. Let's sit down on one of the park benches, fresh our minds. Maybe we'll think of something. Maybe we'll see something. And as they're sitting there, somebody is walking by or driving by, and he stops and he looks at these three people, specifically at this teacher. And they're looking and looking. Nobody knows what to do. He looks like some sort of a person in government, the way he was dressed. So the mayor of Falls, who is accustomed to speak to government people, he was the head of the community, walks over to him and says in Russian, I see that you're looking at this person. Can I help you in any way? He says, yes, I want to speak to that person. I want to make an appointment to meet with him. I want him to meet me tomorrow in my hotel room. Okay. The person said later, I don't even speak Russian. How am I going to speak to him? He says, I want to speak to you. Just go. We'll see what happens. Anyway, he comes to him the next day and he says, where are you from? And he tells me the city that he's from. He says, no, tell me, think, which city are you from? I'm from this city. Aren't you from this city? He gave him another name. I don't remember the city. Yeah. He says, 20 years ago, I grew up in that city, but now I live 20 years already in a different city. So you recognize me? He says, no. He says, do you remember a story that there was a kid in the city where you lived that did something terrible, and the community punished this child in a very severe way? They locked him up in some sort of a box, and everybody was making fun of him. And then you went when nobody was looking, and you unlocked the thing, and he ran away. And of course, he said, yeah, I remember. Well, said, I'm that kid. And I really hated the community after this. And he said he went and he converted to Christianity. But I never forgot the kindness that you did. And I always said to myself, if I ever see you again, I'd like to help you in any way possible. And I can't believe that here I see you. And therefore, I want to give you 5,000 rubles, a lot of money. And you know what? I'm actually a minister, and I'm in Petersburg. And he said, I want to reward you. Come to me with Petersburg, and you work amongst the ministers. And he said, please, I'm a Malamed. I teach little kids. I'm not a minister. I don't even speak Russian. They were speaking Yiddish. That's not a place for me. I would be too overwhelmed in such a place. I'm happy to live where I am. So, okay, let me at least give you money. But let me ask you a question. If you live in that city, what were you doing in Vilna? He says, the Alter Rebbe of Chabad, he told his chassid that I should come here. I said, really? You know who I am? I'm the minister of education. And the minister who gives the permits for printing. If you would have gone to Petersburg, you actually wouldn't find me. And I have my documents and I have my seal here. And if I can do that favor for you, of course I'll do it. He took out his papers, signed the document that he's giving you the permit for the printing. Doesn't have to pay all the expenses that you're supposed to pay. And of course, they saw openly how the Alter Rebbe saw all this, exactly what the Alter Rebbe saw, I'm not sure, but apparently he saw the connection between these two people, and that he's going to be in Vilna, and this person, not even a chassid, would go there and he'd recognize him and he'd pay him back. It's just incredible we learn from this story that we don't even begin to understand what a Rebbe is. A Rebbe is a spiritual person, a godly person. His understanding, his perception, his knowledge is way beyond what we can even think of it. Not just smart person, intelligent, has knowledge of a lot of things. This is not just knowledge. This is something spiritual, higher than knowledge. And I think another thing we can learn from today's stories that I'm telling you is, if you would look in the history books of Russia, or the history books of France, where they discuss the war, is there any mention there about the Alter Rebbe? No, I guarantee you, nothing. So they explain everything from a military perspective. Russia made a mistake by doing this. France made a mistake by doing that. And because Russia did this and France did that, that's why they won and that's why they lost. Everything is explained from the natural way. When you learn the secret, what does it tell us? The reason why France was defeated was the Alter Rebbe was doing everything he can spiritually so that France should be defeated, through his prayers, through his shofar blowing. What we see here is that even though we see things happening in the physical, and there's all sorts of reasons why it's happening, and it all makes sense, but the real reason why it's happening is coming from a higher place. So everything that's going on in France today, whatever's going on in Russia today, and what's going on in the United States of America today, which is in turmoil, president, this president, that president, let's not think that it's so simple. There are all sorts of reasons that could be behind it, but it's happening from a higher place. That's number one. Number two, there's no doubt in my mind, based on everything the Rebbe taught us, that all this turmoil, which is really affecting the world globally, is all connected to the process of Mashiach coming. And that's what's really happening. These are all things that are happening on a very, very large scale, and it's affecting the whole world. So therefore, I don't doubt that this is part of the process of affecting Mashiach's coming. So to conclude, today is a special day. Today we should add in tzedakah, learn something from the Alter Rebbe. You can learn Tanya. There's this sefer which I mentioned before is called the Kuti Torah. So the Friedrich Rebbe told a very cute story that he was once traveling with his father, the Rebbe Rashab. And in those days, they didn't have pictures of people like we have today. So even though the Rebbe Rashab was known as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but nobody knew what he looked like. Nobody knew what the Friedrich Rebbe looked like. In fact, they both looked like ordinary Lithuanian Jews, because Chabad don't have the long payas. We don't have these special hats. So outwardly, we look like Lithuanian Jews, like yeshivish people today. So they came to this place, which was a Hasidic town. They sat down in one of the shuls. People looked at them like, okay, they looked like honorable people, but they had no idea who they were. And they sat down after davening to learn. They were learning halacha. And they learned for many hours. In the late afternoon, when the people came for mincha, they're still learning halacha. So there was one of the Hasidim there thought, okay, these are Lithuanian Jews, they know nothing but halacha. And he said, listen, Ingelait, he said in Yiddish, Ingelait, als du, a bissel du, means everything is over here for the head. What about your heart? Do something for your heart. You're just learning academically. So the Rebbe Rashab said, no, you're right. Maybe you have a good suggestion of what I could learn. So he says, this cipher, the Kuti Torah, it's a fire in the cipher. You should try to learn some of this. He's telling the Rebbe Rashab. So these are, today's the day to learn something from the Alter Rebbe, give tzedakah. We just heard some stories that you can repeat stories of the Alter Rebbe if you can by a Shabbos table. And hopefully the schus of the Alter Rebbe will be upon us and will add to tip the scale to bring Mashiach when we'll see the Alter Rebbe himself. Good Shabbos, everybody. Good Shabbos. And enjoy. Yeah. Yeah. What? His name is Rabbi Majeski. He was a